On a lawless station where survival is everything, Lennox, a seasoned soldier, wakes up to find an unexpected reward, a beautiful alien woman, bound and terrified, delivered to him as a prize for saving a life. But as danger lurks around every corner, he realizes she's no ordinary captive. With enemies closing in and a life debt hanging over him, Lennox must decide, will he protect her from a merciless world, or will the galaxy's darkest secrets tear them apart? Stay with us, because the stakes are higher than ever, and the fight for freedom is only just beginning. If you're new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move to this wonderful story. Lennox woke up to a pounding headache, his skull throbbing like a battalion of micro-drills drilling through his brain. He groaned, turning onto his side as his senses slowly dragged him back to reality. The sterile white ceiling above him swam into focus, and with it came the memories of the previous night, the kind of night that always ended with a headache, regret, and vague recollections of questionable decisions. He muttered under his breath, pressing his palm against his temple. "Damn you, Corin," he said, his voice low and raspy. The alien information broker had insisted they celebrate after Lennox had saved him from a firefight with rival traders, some celebration that had turned out to be Corin pouring exotic liquor down his throat until he could barely see straight. Lennox rubbed his eyes, trying to clear the fog in his mind, but all he could remember were flashes of laughter, the sour taste of alcohol, and the buzz in his head. He reached for the side of the bed, but a sharp pain shot through his skull, making him wince. The grogginess made him dizzy as he pushed himself up. Whatever that liquor was, it still felt like it was burning a hole through his brain. As his vision cleared, Lennox realized that he wasn't alone. There was a figure standing motionless in the corner of his room. He froze, his military instincts kicking in despite the blinding headache. His hand shot to the side of the bed where his sidearm usually sat, but his fingers met nothing but cold sheets. His heart raced. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, squinting through the pain. The figure didn't respond immediately. It stood, still, as though waiting for something. Then, as if reluctant to break its silence, the figure took a step forward into the dim light. Lennox could finally see who or what it was. It was a female humanoid, but she was definitely not human. Her skin was a deep crimson, adorned with intricate pale patterns that flowed across her exposed arms and face, almost as if they were alive. Her silvery white hair fell in two elegant strands over her shoulders, contrasting starkly with her fiery skin. She was wearing what could barely be described as clothing, tattered beige fabric that barely covered her form, revealing more than it concealed. The sight made Lennox's stomach churn, and he couldn't help but feel a wave of discomfort rise in him. But the most unsettling part of it all were the energy cuffs glowing with soft blue light around her wrists. "Xander sent me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She kept her eyes fixed on the floor. "I am your reward." Lennox blinked, his mind struggling to process her words. "My reward?" he repeated, the words feeling foreign to him. His mind was still fuzzy from the alcohol, but he could sense that something wasn't right. He scanned the room quickly, trying to assess the situation, but his head felt like it was full of cotton, dulling everything. The woman's amber eyes, full of fear and resignation, met his for the briefest of moments before she quickly looked down again. The sight made Lennox feel uneasy, like he was witnessing something far too personal. Something that didn't belong in his world. "You're not a reward," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "You're a person." But she didn't respond to that. Instead, she repeated, "I am your reward for saving Master Corin's life." Lennox pushed himself to his feet, his muscles aching from a night of too much alcohol and too little sleep. He ran a hand through his dark hair, still trying to shake off the drowsiness that clung to him like a heavy blanket. "Look, I don't want a reward," he said, his voice more forceful than he intended. He didn't want to be rude, but this situation was getting more bizarre by the minute. "You're not my property, and I'm not about to treat you like one." Her gaze stayed lowered, but she flinched slightly when he spoke. Lennox could see how tightly she was holding herself together, almost like she was bracing for a blow. It made his stomach turn. He didn't know what was going on, but he knew one thing for sure: she was terrified. "What's your name?" Lennox asked, his voice softer now. His instincts told him to be kind, to try to get through to her. She hesitated for a moment, then whispered, "Solene, Solene," he repeated, testing the name. "And Corin gave you to me?" She nodded almost imperceptibly. Her fear was palpable, but she didn't try to deny it. Lennox felt a surge of anger toward Corin, but he kept it inside. "You're not a thing, Solene," he said, taking a step toward her. "You're not an object. You're a person. I'm not going to treat you like this." Solene's gaze flickered to him for just a moment, the faintest glimmer of something resembling hope in her amber eyes. Lennox didn't know how, but he could feel that hope. And something else too. Something he couldn't quite name. This wasn't just about rescuing her from a bad situation. He felt an odd sense of responsibility, a duty to protect her, even though he barely knew her. "Look," Lennox said, rubbing his forehead. "I can't just free you and expect everything to be fine. I need to figure out what the hell is going on. You're staying here for now, but you're not my slave, you understand?" Solene tilted her head slightly, a confused look on her face. "What does that mean?" she asked softly. "It means," Lennox replied, his voice firm but kind, "you're a guest. I'm not going to make you do anything you don't want to do. You're free to make your own choices." Solene didn't respond immediately. Instead, she seemed to be processing his words, trying to understand what they meant. Finally, after a long pause, she nodded slowly. "Guest," she repeated as if the word were foreign to her. "I am a guest." "Yeah," Lennox said, offering her a small smile. "You're a guest." He didn't know how to fix the situation, but at least he had made one thing clear. He wasn't going to let her suffer. He would figure it out, even if it meant facing the dangerous world of Obsidian Station and the shady dealings of Corin and his associates. For now, though, all he could do was offer her some semblance of kindness in this strange, hostile place, and that would have to be enough. He gestured to the small couch in the corner of the room. "Why don't you sit down? Get comfortable. I need to think." Solene hesitated for a moment, then moved to the couch, her posture stiff as she sat down. Lennox watched her, his mind racing with questions, but for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel completely alone in this alien world. Lennox's mind raced as he paced back and forth in his quarters, trying to piece together the mess that had unfolded in the last few hours. He ran his hand through his hair, feeling the strain of exhaustion and confusion settle over him like a heavy cloak. Solene sat quietly on the small couch, her amber eyes following his every movement. Despite her newfound freedom, there was an undeniable tension in her posture, as if she wasn't entirely sure what to do with herself now that she wasn't bound by the glowing energy cuffs. Lennox knew he couldn't ignore the situation any longer. He had to figure out what to do with her. The rules on Obsidian Station were clear. This was a place where anything and anyone could be bought and sold. The local laws, or lack thereof, operated on a different moral compass, one that didn't care about the rights of individuals, only about profit and power. And now, Lennox found himself in the middle of it all, with a beautiful, terrified alien woman whose life had been bought and sold like a piece of property. He stopped pacing, his eyes locking onto hers. Solene's expression was unreadable, a mixture of confusion and something else, something deeper that Lennox couldn't quite place. It was as though she was waiting for him to make a decision for both of them, even though she had been freed from her bonds. "I'm not going to let you stay here as a reward," Lennox said firmly, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his chest. "You're not my property, Solene. No one owns you. You get to decide what happens next." Solene's eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of something like disbelief crossing her face. "But you saved Master Corin," she said softly, almost as if trying to reason with him. "He gave me to you. That means nothing," Lennox interrupted, his frustration rising. Where I come from, people are not property. You deserve to make your own choices, Solene. No one should tell you what to do, not even Corin. She looked down at her hands, the faint markings on her crimson skin catching the light as she flexed her fingers. I was never taught to make choices, she murmured. I was only taught to follow orders, to serve. My existence has always been tied to someone else's will. Lennox felt a pang in his chest. He had known that her people were considered slaves, but hearing it from her mouth made it all the more real. Her words carried the weight of years of subjugation, of being treated as nothing more than a tool. The idea of her living like that, unable to make her own decisions, gnawed at him. You can choose now, Lennox said, his voice gentler this time. He took a step closer to her, trying to show her that he wasn't going to treat her like everyone else had. You're free to do whatever you want. You're not beholden to me or anyone else. You get to decide your future. For a long moment, Selene remained silent. She seemed to be processing his words, her gaze fixed on the floor. Lennox waited, giving her the space she needed to understand what freedom really meant. He could see that it wasn't just about being physically free from the energy cuffs. It was about giving her the power to control her own fate, something she had likely never experienced before. Finally, she looked up at him, her amber eyes filled with uncertainty. But where would I go? She asked softly. What do I do now? Lennox sighed, his shoulders heavy with the weight of the decision he had to make. He had no idea what the right answer was, but he knew one thing. Leaving her to fend for herself on Obsidian Station would be a death sentence. The station was a place of lawlessness where survival was only for the strongest, and Solene, as powerful as she might be, wasn't prepared for the dangers that lurked in every shadow. I don't know, he admitted, running a hand over his face. But I'm not leaving you here. We'll figure something out. Maybe we can leave this station. Go somewhere safer. You could, I don't know, find a new life somewhere. The idea seemed to take root in Selene's mind, but it was clear she wasn't ready to fully embrace it. You would help me? She asked, the surprise in her voice evident. Lennox nodded. Of course. You don't deserve to live like this, and I'm not going to let you go back to being someone's possession. He paused, trying to gather his thoughts. But I can't do it alone. We'll need to leave the station, but I need to think. We'll have to plan. Be smart about it. Solene sat up straighter, her posture less tense now, though there was still a hint of uncertainty in her eyes. And, what will you do? She asked, her voice soft but steady. Lennox looked at her for a long moment. He hadn't realized how much this situation had affected him until now. He had always been the one in control, the one making the tough calls, but for the first time, he felt a sense of responsibility that went beyond just his mission. It was as if everything that had led him here, his training, his life, the war, had all been preparing him for this moment, to stand up for someone who couldn't stand up for themselves. I'll do whatever it takes to get you out of here, Lennox said quietly, his voice firm. You have my word. No one will own you again. Solene's gaze softened, and for the first time since he had met her, Lennox saw a glimmer of hope in her eyes. It was a small thing, a fleeting moment, but it was there, and that was enough. I'm not sure what freedom looks like, Solene said, her voice barely above a whisper, but maybe I can learn. Lennox nodded, feeling the weight of the decision settle on his shoulders. This wasn't going to be easy, and there was a lot more at stake than he'd realized. But he couldn't walk away. Not now. Not when Selene was counting on him. We'll figure it out, Lennox said with a determined smile. Together. Lennox could feel the weight of the decision pressing on his chest as he sat down beside the small comm unit in his quarters. The station, a bustling hub of alien trade, held nothing but danger for Selene. He could no longer stand by and let her live in the shadows, forced into a life she had never chosen. He needed to get her out. But where could they go? Obsidian Station was not a place that welcomed escape, especially not from someone as valuable as Solene. She was more than just a person to be freed. She was a valuable asset, a piece of living weaponry. If they were to leave, they had to be careful. Lennox, what now? Soline's soft voice broke into his thoughts, pulling him from his troubled musings. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, her amber eyes scanning his face, looking for the answers he didn't have. She was more than just a victim now. She was a person with hopes, with dreams that had been stifled for too long. We leave, Lennox said, his voice steady, though the uncertainty in his heart told a different story. We get off this station before Corin or anyone else has a chance to come after you again. Soline's gaze flickered with unease. How? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. How do we leave? Lennox sighed. It wasn't a simple question. Obsidian Station was a lawless place, filled with criminals and traitors who had no regard for morality. It wasn't like the Earth Alliance, where people were free and laws protected the innocent. Here, the strong ruled, and the weak were preyed. Pon Corin, the information broker, was well connected and his reach spread far. His influence could stretch across the station, making any escape nearly impossible. Lennox knew that going up against Corin would put them both in grave danger, but staying here meant Soline would be at risk every single day. We'll need to find a way out. A ship. Someone who won't ask too many questions, Lennox muttered, more to himself than to her. Someone we can trust. Soline shifted on the bed, her movements hesitant, almost as if she were unsure how to act in this strange new world where she was no longer a slave. She met his eyes with a quiet resolve, something he hadn't noticed in her before. Where would we go, though? She asked. I've never been beyond the station. Where do we even start? Lennox paused, thinking. He had been on enough missions, dealt with enough shady characters to know that there were always connections to be made. People willing to look the other way for the right price. And if that price wasn't too high, they might even help him slip off the station undetected. The Earth Alliance, though far away, was his best bet. It wasn't perfect, but it was the only place where people like Soline could have a chance at real freedom. We head to the Earth Alliance, Lennox said, his voice firm with determination. It's a long shot, but it's the only shot we have. Once we're there, we can get you the protection you need. Soline nodded slowly, her eyes filled with uncertainty but also with a spark of something else. Hope. It was a fragile hope, but it was there. It was enough to keep her moving, enough to make her believe that things could be different. How do we get there? Soline asked, her voice softer this time. I know a few people, Lennox said. I'll find us a way off this rock, one way or another. The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. Lennox contacted a few old contacts, people he had worked with in the past, those who owed him favors or were willing to do business under the table. But every lead he followed seemed to lead to a dead end. Either the ship captains were too expensive, too high risk, or just plain unreliable. He could feel the frustration building as the hours ticked by, each passing moment pushing them closer to being caught. It wasn't until the late afternoon that Lennox finally found a viable option. He was sitting at a dimly lit table in a corner of the Nebula Lounge, the station's most infamous bar, when a figure slid into the seat across from him. It was Maddox, a rough-around-the-edges cargo captain who had crossed paths with Lennox during a mission a few years ago. Maddox was a man of few words, but when he spoke, people listened. His reputation for getting things done, even if it was by the wrong methods, had made him an invaluable contact in situations like this. Maddox, Lennox said, leaning forward, his voice low. I need a way off this station. And I need it fast. Maddox didn't waste time with pleasantries. I've got a ship, he said, his gruff voice matching his demeanor. Heading out tomorrow, Earth Alliance supply run. Got room for a couple of passengers if the price is right. Lennox's heart skipped a beat. This was the break they needed. How much? He asked, his voice steady despite the relief that was beginning to flood through him. Maddox tapped his fingers on the table, clearly weighing his options. 10,000 credits, he said. I'm not running a charity. You pay, you get on the ship. Lennox winced. 10,000 credits wasn't a small sum, especially when his funds were tight. But he had no choice. He had to get Soline out of there. He couldn't risk waiting any longer. "I'll take it," Lennox said, pulling out his comm unit to transfer the payment. "But we'll need to leave tonight. The sooner the better." Maddox raised an eyebrow. "You sure you can handle it?" he asked, his tone skeptical. "This station isn't exactly a place where you can leave quietly." "I can handle it," Lennox said, his voice firm. "We'll be ready." As Maddox stood to leave, Lennox couldn't help but feel a surge of hope for the first time in days. They had a way out. They had a plan. But the weight of the situation wasn't lost on him. They still had to deal with Corin, with the danger of being hunted down, and the constant threat that someone would expose their escape. But for now he had a way to protect Celine. Lennox returned to his quarters, his thoughts running wild. He found Celine standing near the window, looking out into the vast expanse of stars beyond. The weight of her past, of everything she had endured, seemed to hang heavily in the air. But in that moment she wasn't a slave. She was a person, someone he was willing to risk everything for. "We're leaving tonight," Lennox said, his voice steady but filled with the promise of something more. "We've got a way out." Celine turned to face him, her amber eyes filled with something he couldn't quite place. "And where do we go?" she asked softly. Lennox smiled. "We go to a place where you can be free. A place where no one will own you. Where you can make your own choices. Earth Alliance space." For the first time, Celine's expression softened into a small smile. It was a quiet thing, but it was there, and Lennox couldn't help but feel like they were finally on the right path. He had no idea what would happen next, but for the first time in a long while he felt like they had a fighting chance. As they prepared to leave, Lennox felt the weight of everything on his shoulders, but it was different this time. He wasn't just protecting himself. He was protecting Celine, and maybe, just maybe, he was protecting what could be the start of something bigger than either of them. The escape was on. And no matter what happened, Lennox was ready. The hours leading up to their escape were tense. Lennox moved quickly, his mind racing with thoughts of what might go wrong. He double-checked everything in his quarters, ensuring there was nothing left to chance. He couldn't afford any mistakes, not with Celine's life on the line. The clock on the wall ticked away, each second a reminder that they had limited time. If they were caught now, it would be the end of everything. Celine, sitting on the edge of the bed, seemed lost in thought. The weight of what was about to happen was evident in her eyes. She had come so far from the frightened woman Lennox had found just a day ago. Now she was strong, capable, and ready to fight for her freedom. But there was still an underlying fear in her gaze, fear that she would never truly escape the chains of her past. Lennox sat beside her, offering a reassuring smile. "We're almost there," he said, though his own heart was racing with anticipation. "Just stay calm, stick to the plan, we'll get through this." Celine nodded, her eyes still filled with uncertainty. "And if something goes wrong?" she asked softly. "Then we deal with it," Lennox said, his tone firm but comforting. "We get out of here no matter what." It was only then that he allowed himself to admit how much he had come to care for her. The connection between them had grown stronger with each passing hour. What started as an act of kindness, a sense of responsibility, had transformed into something far deeper. He wasn't just helping her escape anymore. He was fighting for her, and in some ways for himself too. He didn't know how or when it had happened, but somewhere along the way, he had stopped seeing her as just a reward or a mission. She was more than that now. She was his equal. The plan was simple: get to the docks, meet Maddox, and board the ship. The only issue was getting past the dozens of Corin's men who were no doubt on the lookout for them. Lennox had been careful, making sure no one saw them leave his quarters, but there was always the chance that someone had caught wind of their plans. If they were caught now, it would be disastrous. "Let's go," Lennox said, rising from the bed and offering his hand to Celine. She took it without hesitation, the strength in her grip surprising him. As they moved toward the door, Lennox took a deep breath. This was it, the moment of truth. They made their way through the station's darkened hallways, each step taking them closer to the docks. and farther from the safety of the station's walls. The air seemed to thicken as they moved through the narrow corridors, the hum of the station's machinery fading into the background. It was as though the station itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. At one point they had to stop and wait as a pair of station guards passed by, talking casually. Lennox held his breath, his hand subtly moving to the sidearm strapped to his waist. Solene remained perfectly still, her amber eyes scanning the hall. She was alert, now no longer the timid woman she had been hours ago. She was a warrior, born from a past filled with violence and survival. Her movements were precise, calculating. Once the guards passed, they continued, moving swiftly but carefully. Every turn felt like it could be their last. The station was too quiet now, too still. Lennox knew that something was about to go wrong. It always did. When they reached the docking bay, Maddox's ship, the Wayward Sun, loomed ahead. The worn cargo hauler sat in the corner, its engines humming softly, ready for takeoff. But as they approached the ramp, Lennox noticed something that made his stomach drop. Two large figures standing near the entrance. Draconians, Corin's enforcers. Damn it, Lennox muttered under his breath. They're already here. Solene, sensing the danger, stepped closer to him. What now? We improvise, Lennox said, his mind working quickly. He reached for his sidearm, his fingers brushing against the cold metal. We need to move fast. Stay behind me. They moved forward, trying to remain unnoticed, but as they approached the ramp, one of the Draconians spotted them. Hey, you there! The Draconian shouted, his voice rough and grating. Lennox's heart leapt into his throat. There was no more time for subtlety. He grabbed Solene's arm and pulled her toward the ramp. Run! The Draconians were fast, but Lennox was faster. He fired a warning shot at the nearest one, sending the massive alien stumbling back. The sound of blaster fire echoed through the docking bay, and suddenly, the entire station seemed to come alive with movement. Alarms blared as the Draconians rushed toward them, their weapons drawn. Move! Lennox shouted, pushing Solene up the ramp ahead of him. He heard the heavy thud of the Draconians' footsteps behind them. They were gaining. The ramp began to rise as they reached the top, and just as it closed behind them, the sound of gunfire filled the air. Maddox, standing at the top of the ramp, shouted at them. Get inside, now! Solene rushed inside, and Lennox followed, barely ducking as a blast narrowly missed his head. He scrambled into the ship, his heart racing, and Maddox slammed the ramp shut just as the Draconians reached the entrance. Get to the cockpit, Maddox shouted, motioning for them to move quickly. We need to get out of here, and fast. Lennox didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed Solene's arm and led her toward the cockpit. As they ran, he could hear the hum of the engines shifting, the ship preparing for takeoff. He glanced out the window just in time to see the Draconians rushing toward them. They were too late. Hold on, Maddox called from the cockpit. The ship shuddered as it powered up, and within seconds they were moving. Fast. The docking bay grew smaller as the ship surged forward, and Lennox allowed himself a moment of relief. They were free. But as the ship tore through the station's atmosphere, Lennox couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Corin wouldn't let them go this easily. He had too much invested in Solene, too much to lose. Solene, sitting beside him, looked out the window with a quiet intensity. Her amber eyes were fixed on the stars ahead, her mind clearly elsewhere. What happens now? She asked, her voice low. Lennox sighed, leaning back in his seat. We make our way to Earth Alliance space, he said, his voice steady despite the uncertainty. We'll figure out the rest when we get there. Solene nodded, her gaze softening as she turned to him. And what about us? She asked quietly, her eyes searching his face. Lennox met her gaze, feeling the weight of the question settle over him. He had no answers. Not yet. But he knew one thing for sure. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. He couldn't imagine doing it any other way. We'll figure it out, he said, his voice filled with determination. Together. As the ship sped away from Obsidian Station and toward the unknown, Lennox felt the future stretch out before them, uncertain, dangerous, but full of possibility. Whatever awaited them on the other side, they were no longer running from their past. They were stepping into a future that was theirs to shape, and that Lennox realized was enough.